My name is Julian. The confirmation arrived yesterday, not in a loud, dramatic explosion, but in a cold, quiet flood of digital data that washed away the last shreds of my reality. What I found was a chasm of deception, a calculated cruelty that transcended mere infidelity. It was worse than I could have ever conceived, a systematic assassination of my character and the entire 5 years we spent as husband and wife. The truth is a devastating thing when it finally chooses to appear, fully formed and monstrous. Our story began with a whirlwind romance back in 2019, the kind of accelerated, intense connection that felt like destiny. We met, we fell hard, and we rushed headlong into marriage in 2020, caught up in the romantic notion of finding our forever person. She was a vibrant, quick-witted woman who seemed to match my quiet intensity with her own powerful, creative energy. I was 35 and she was 32, and she was the only woman I had ever been intimate with, the singular focus of my entire romantic life. She'd had previous boyfriends and partners during her college years, which I never thought twice about. Her past was hers, and our future was ours. Our 5-year anniversary looms this month, a grotesque landmark we will now never reach together. The initial intensity of our connection, however, proved to be an unsustainable burn, leaving behind an ashy, hollowed-out marriage. We struggled under the weight of multiple, compounding issues that slowly but surely eroded our foundation. My own contribution to the slow rot was a struggle with a naturally low libido, a factor that certainly created distance, though I tried desperately to bridge the gap with emotional support and affection. I was also a smoker, a habit I knew she disliked, adding a layer of constant, low-grade tension to our daily life. Her challenges were more fundamental to the structure of our shared existence and how she viewed the world. Her dreams of running a successful business had crashed and burned, but she adamantly refused to seek standard employment. The idea of working a regular 9-to-5 job, she often sniffed, was simply beneath her creative spirit and intellectual caliber. Yet putting in the necessary, relentless effort to actually revive her business was also somehow too difficult, leaving her perpetually adrift, financially dependent, and bitterly resentful of her own inertia. Our home environment was a war zone of escalating frustration, peppered with temper issues from both sides. While I fought my own battles with quick irritation, her reaction to stress was to unleash a torrent of volatility and threats. From the very beginning of our marriage, she weaponized the concept of divorce, tossing the word out in nearly every serious argument, using it as a chilling, ultimate checkmate. It was a constant reminder that our commitment was conditional, always hanging by a thread she was ready to snip at any moment. Compounding the emotional stress was the state of our living space, a visual metaphor for the chaos of our relationship. She was, to put it mildly, a total slob, a person whose refusal to manage basic domesticity escalated far beyond mere messiness. The kitchen, in particular, became a legitimate health hazard, a place I had to meticulously clean myself before I could dare prepare or eat food. This constant lack of care for our shared environment made me feel, subconsciously but profoundly, that she was not truly invested in the marriage, or even in my basic health and well-being. The breaking point arrived back in May, a particularly nasty, prolonged fight that left us in a frigid silence, refusing to acknowledge each other's presence. I was the one who eventually broke the deadlock, reaching out via text, choosing a mediated distance over the immediate fire of verbal combat. I texted her about the intense pain I was experiencing, the agony of feeling consistently misunderstood and undervalued, hoping that a written word might finally bypass her defenses. Suddenly, and inexplicably, that seemed to flip a switch in her head, triggering a complete, irreversible emotional disconnect. The very next morning, she declared with chilling clarity that she wanted a divorce. I felt the familiar, cold wave of dread wash over me, recognizing the pattern. Oh God! I thought, she's doing it again. This was just another round in our exhausting, perpetual cycle. My immediate, ingrained response was to shift into crisis management mode of calm her down, man. Smooth things over. Compromise on your needs. Let her feel comforted and safe. She'll calm down eventually, and we can move past this. I had been performing this emotional balancing act for years, sacrificing my own peace for hers. But this time was profoundly different. She was utterly adamant. She put her foot down with a certainty I had never witnessed, demanding a divorce with no discussion, no room for mediation, and a staunch refusal to even consider visiting our therapist. It was an outright rejection of everything we had built and every tool we had ever used to try and save it. This was the same therapist, ironically, who she herself had chosen and who I felt always leaned in her favor. ensuring she felt at ease. The rejection wasn't about fairness or comfort. It was about ending the conversation entirely. She demanded that I grant her a divorce by mutual consent immediately, and with a surprisingly generous gesture, stipulated that she wouldn't ask for anything from me in return. The demand for an immediate, clean break and her willingness to walk away from all community property felt profoundly strange, a flagrant deviation from the usual drawn-out, painful reality of divorce proceedings. It was the first hint of an underlying reason I could not yet fathom, a secret urgency that necessitated this sudden, non-negotiable exit. I told her honestly that granting an immediate divorce was simply not possible. When she demanded to know why, I reminded her of the unique, complex situation I was currently navigating. I couldn't reveal the exact details, but I was deep in the application process for a significant career advancement opportunity. My application looked significantly more favorable if I maintained my marital status on paper throughout the submission and vetting period. It was a temporary, necessary bureaucratic hurdle, one that bought me crucial time to breathe and think. The application was the perfect, irrefutable defense. Faced with this practical roadblock, she relented on the immediacy of the divorce, but immediately switched tactics. She ordered me to leave the house, insisting on a physical separation instead. This house, the root of much of our entanglement, was her mother's, a floor in the family home where we had moved in to support my mother-in-law after my father-in-law passed during the pandemic. Leaving meant finally escaping not just her, but the suffocating, manipulative orbit of her mother, a quintessential helicopter parent who could never tolerate decisions made independently by her children. Before the separation became physical, I tried desperately to understand the mentality behind her sudden, fervent demand for dissolution. I truly believed we could still work through whatever crisis she was having. That 10 years wasn't something you simply threw away. Her answers were frustratingly vague, drenched in the clichés of self-help narratives. She spoke of pouring so much love into me that she had lost herself, and now needed to be selfish, to embark on a journey of self-healing and discovery. The constant refrain was that she could no longer be weighed down by the social contract of marriage. But she could never articulate what precisely was the issue with our marriage beyond her general restlessness. I pressed her, pointing out the facts. I had never abused her, never hit her, never restricted her freedom in any meaningful way. She had her own active social life, saw her friends frequently, and utilized my car far more than I did. Yet, she refused to give me any concrete details, retreating into the fortress of her vague, self-serving sentiments. In a final, bizarre attempt to minimize the loss and preserve some future claim on me, she proposed a completely non-traditional arrangement. We could divorce now, stay apart for 2 or 3 years, and if we both made progress in our independent lives, we could reunite, not under the archaic institution of marriage, but in some vague loving partnership and have a child together. The suggestion was insulting in its casual disregard for my values, and in its complete self-focus. I immediately shut down the co-parenting fantasy. I told her firmly that being married was sacred to me, especially if we were to have a child. I refused to subject a child to a fractured, week-on-week off life, or to a life that began in a state of deliberate, structural separation. I stated that I did not believe that scenario made for a good household to raise a child. The conversation, predictably, went nowhere. She was speaking a language of transient self-focused liberation, and I was speaking a language of permanent, traditional commitment. So, I began to prepare for the inevitable separation. I asked for a few weeks to organize my affairs and find a new place. I searched the house, checking drawers and closets one last time for any documentation, any clue to the real reason for the abrupt exit, but found nothing. Finally, in early June, I packed the necessary essentials and relocated across the city, moving into my father's house. The weight of the familiar environment lifted almost immediately, replaced by the grim but cleansing process of starting over. I took the separation as a stark, necessary life lesson and threw myself into the brutal work of self-improvement. I committed fully to therapy to address my own to ignite temper. I began a rigorous fitness routine, determined to address my low libido and reclaim my physical health. And, with immense effort, I finally quit smoking, shedding the one vice that had long complicated my life. I even made affirmations of my progress, providing her with regular, honest updates, believing that if she saw me changing, she might rethink her stance. But she remained relentlessly adamant about the divorce. She promised to assist with the application process required for my career advancement, but made it clear that the divorce would follow immediately upon its completion. Her rationale hadn't shifted. It was the same tiresome loop of vague sentiments: self-healing, discovery, being selfish about her love. The repetition, the utter lack of new reasoning, finally started to fuel my suspicion, despite my efforts to ignore it. I kept pushing the suspicion away, fiercely. I reasoned that my wife, above all things, absolutely despised cheaters. Just last year, she and I had vehemently chewed out a distant acquaintance for stepping out on his marriage, both of us united in our moral disgust. I chose, desperately, to believe the best in her, to assume her selfishness was simply emotional, a clumsy search for self-identity, and not the concealment of active betrayal. My desire to trust her was stronger than the accumulating evidence of her strange behavior. The first undeniable piece of evidence landed 2 weeks ago. She had called me, asking me to come by and watch our cats while she visited a nearby city with her cousin and her husband for the weekend. I agreed, the pet sitting a final, fragile link to the life we shared. When I arrived, the house was, predictably, a catastrophic mess. I began cleaning, trying to make the space habitable, starting with the kitchen and moving through the dining room and hall. Finally, I entered our former bedroom. I noticed the side table's drawers were in their usual disarray, a tangled mix of forgotten papers and trivial items. I opened them, determined to sort and organize the mess, an exercise, perhaps, in trying to impose order on the internal chaos she had left behind. And then there it was. Nestled beneath a stack of old receipts and hair ties were 2 unused condoms. The sight of them sent a sharp, cold jolt through my entire body, a physical wave of nausea that made the room swim. We hadn't used condoms in years. We had been actively trying to conceive for the last year, eliminating any need for them. Furthermore, the brand was one I had never purchased, never even seen in our house. Alarm bells didn't just ring, they clanged with deafening certainty. I immediately messaged my younger brother, who lives halfway across the country, knowing I needed to speak the awful truth out loud. We both agreed instantly there was absolutely no innocent explanation for this discovery. But I knew this was inconclusive, a finding she could easily dismiss with another flimsy lie. "Oh, that's something a friend dropped by." It slipped out of her purse. I couldn't confront her with just this. I needed irrefutable proof, the kind of evidence that would demolish her carefully constructed narrative of the social contract and self-healing. I had to wait, to endure the gnawing suspicion for 2 agonizing weeks, holding the knowledge of those small, silver packets like a physical weight in my hands. The opportunity presented itself yesterday. I visited her at the part-time place where she was subbing for a friend, a quick check-in before she left for her weekend vacation with her friend. She needed me to sit the cats again. Another chance for me to observe the wreckage she left behind. She complained that one of her apps wasn't working correctly and asked me to fix it on her phone. I saw the opening, a small window into her secret world, and my heart hammered against my ribs. I asked her to step out for a moment to get me some water, a request she complied with automatically. The second she was gone, I acted with the rapid, surgical focus of a man fighting for his life. I opened her messaging app and scanned quickly, catching sight of several unfamiliar men's names, contacts I had never seen or heard of. With shaking hands, I synced her WhatsApp account to my laptop's browser using the desktop version. It was a race against time, a desperate digital invasion, but I managed to close the browser tab before she returned, holding the phone steady and composing my face into an expression of feigned technical frustration. I sped back to the house, the laptop burning a hole in the passenger seat. My hands were clammy, my mind racing, preparing for the worst, yet somehow utterly unprepared for the reality I was about to face. I opened my laptop, relaunched the browser, and the full, unfiltered torrent of her secret life poured across my screen. It was an immediate, overwhelming confirmation of everything I had feared, and so much more that I hadn't. The first thing I saw confirmed my darkest suspicion. She had been actively using Reddit, specifically engaging in the sleazebag subreddits dedicated to hookups and casual encounters. She wasn't just lurking. She was a participant, posting photos of her private areas, submitting them to the moderators for verification. On these sordid, anonymous corners of the internet, the digital trail was not a single, isolated mistake, but a sustained, calculated effort to seek external validation and physical intimacy outside of our marriage. The depth of the betrayal was staggering. I saw evidence of at least 4 different partners, men she had met and engaged with. But the most horrifying revelation was the narrative she had spun to justify her actions. She had told these partners and her closest friends that she had already divorced me last December, months before she actually demanded the separation. To make her story convincing and to gain sympathy, she had painted me as a monster, an incapable, impotent, and worst of all, an abusive husband. The word abusive hung in the air, a poisonous, unearned accusation that made my vision blur with instantaneous, burning rage. I have never in my life laid a finger on her. I have only ever been her support system, her bank, her chauffeur, and the man who tirelessly cleaned her kitchen. To use such a vile lie, such a damaging, unforgivable falsehood to cover her own moral bankruptcy was the final, absolute breaking point. It was a crime against my character that far outweighed the simple act of cheating. I immediately began recording everything I could with screen capture software, frantically documenting the horrific landscape of her deception. Dates, times, phone numbers, locations, voice notes, specific kinks and fetishes discussed, and detailed accounts of things they did. I found records of her getting STD tests, confirming her own anxiety about the risks she was taking. Her texts to her best friends were equally vile, gloating about posting her body online, receiving hundreds of DMs, and how all the attention felt immensely validating for her fragile ego. She had monetized my emotional pain for her self-esteem. The timeline, once I pieced it together, was the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. The earliest text messages I could access, the ones that weren't set to immediately disappear, dated back to June 8th, the day I had officially moved out of the house. Her first physical escapade with a new partner was a mere 2 days later. As I re-examined the recordings later, I realized the full implication. She had only turned off the disappearing message setting after I left. Before June 8th, she had been using that feature, expertly covering her tracks during the weeks she was formulating her escape plan and painting me as the villain. The planning, the malice, was chillingly premeditated. Then came the flash of the screen, the final edit I didn't need but now had to bear. Reddit posts confirmed, in agonizing detail, that she had been intimate with one or more of these strangers on our marital bed. The very sheets we shared, the place where I had offered her comfort and tried to bridge the gap of intimacy, had been defiled. The revelation felt like a physical blow, a violation of the only space that was supposed to be sacrosanct, a perfect symbol of her utter contempt for our bond. My laptop browser crashed. The torrent of data had been too much, or perhaps the connection had timed out. When I relaunched it, I saw that I had been instantly kicked out, the session terminated from her side. My phone rang immediately, her name flashing on the screen. The voice on the other end was demanding, suspicious, and full of false indignation. She demanded to know if I had synced her WhatsApp to my computer. I had to be flawless, the performance of my life. I played it off with a masterful, detached confusion, saying I didn't know what she was talking about. I layered on a convincing excuse, claiming the long drive under the hot sun had completely exhausted me and I had been asleep. She sounded like she bought the explanation, but the suspicion, I knew, would still be there. What she said next, however, was a masterclass in projection that galvanized my resolve. "You didn't sync?" "Oh, okay, good," she sighed with manufactured relief. For a minute there, I was thinking the worst of you. The sheer, audacious irony of that statement, the villain accusing the victim of the crime, snapped the last fragile thread of my emotional connection to her. I knew then that I wasn't just fighting a divorce, I was fighting a full-scale psychological war against a master manipulator. My anger solidified into a block of pure, cold resolve. I knew I couldn't hold on to this devastating secret alone. The sheer weight of the betrayal, the lies, and the character assassination was too much for one person to bear. I called my 2 best mates, pouring out the entire, sickening story in a torrent of desperate, choked words. They didn't hesitate, they rushed over as fast as they could, immediate and unwavering in their support. They listened to every detail, providing the necessary emotional grounding that kept me from shattering. They took me out immediately, feeding me, distracting me with a movie, forcing me back into the world of reality and friendship. They are checking up on me every few hours, a steady, vital lifeline that is ensuring I don't give in to the urge to confront her prematurely. Their presence is a fortress against her manipulation, a constant reminder that my reality is valid and that her lies have been thoroughly exposed. I am no longer alone in this fight. I have my witnesses and my confidantes. She called me earlier today from her vacation, a saccharine, false lightness in her voice. She missed me, she loved me, she said, but the reality of the divorce was sinking in. Then came the patronizing, utterly unbelievable pronouncements she had learned so much from me about punctuality, cleanliness, and discipline. I physically rolled my eyes, a frantic internal movement barely preventing a scoff from escaping my lips. The arrogance of her trying to compliment my life skills while actively destroying my life was staggering. I maintained my composure, feigning an openness to reconciliation that was now a grotesque lie. She then brought up her bizarre fantasy again, talking about how we should both preserve our genetic material for when we inevitably decide to have a baby together. The request, coming from a woman who had been having unprotected sex with strangers in our bed, was a perfect blend of narcissism and delusion, a last-ditch attempt to control my future. I kept my voice even, measured, and firm, delivering a definitive counter statement I knew would annoy her. I will not have a child out of wedlock, I stated plainly. Marriage may be an archaic institution for you, but it is sacred for me. I refuse to raise a child when the parents are separated and not married. I do not believe that makes for a good household to raise the child. If divorce is something you really want, then I'll give it to you. But I won't give you a child. I heard a clear, audible scoff on her end, a sign of her frustration, but she quickly covered it. After a bit more small talk, she ended the call. I felt a cold surge of triumph. I knew I could maintain a perfectly straight face when I had to lie to her. I can play this game. My best friends are now actively helping me construct a shield, ensuring I have solid, unassailable excuses to prevent her from asking me to come and watch the cats again. I know for a fact that the last time I found the condom wrappers, she had used the pet-sitting opportunity to meet one of her partners in the other city for a night together. I will not enable her infidelity again. My mission is clear. I have to keep my head down and play the part of the slightly hurt, open to reconciliation husband until I can safely extricate myself from the marriage and secure the necessary status for my career application. The stakes are too high to allow my emotions to run the show. I must stay the villain she has already painted, the distant, slightly abusive husband, if that means securing my future and escaping her clutches with minimal damage. But the flashes are relentless. There are moments when the blood pounds in my ears, and I want nothing more than to confront her. I fantasize about exposing her with her mother and her elder sister, her nephews, and her brother-in-law, tearing down the scaffold of lies she has built. Everyone in her life currently believes the narrative that I was the abuser, the reason for the marriage's demise. The thought of setting the record straight, of seeing the look on their faces as her mask crumbles, is an almost irresistible temptation. Yet, I resist. I know that such an emotional explosion would only hand her more ammunition, making me look volatile and confirming her narrative of my temper. It would jeopardize my career application by creating a messy, unpredictable divorce that could drag on for years. My priority must be cold, calculating strategy. I have all the proof, the screen caps, the dates, the vile messages, and that is the only weapon I need. I must hold it close, silently, until the moment of maximum strategic advantage. My friends have advised me to focus on the end goal of safety and freedom. That means maintaining the illusion of a man who is hurt but ultimately weak and compliant. When she calls, I will continue to pretend to be open to discussing the future, to sound like the man who might eventually compromise on the non-wedlock child idea. I will let her believe she has the upper hand, that I am clinging to the wreckage of the marriage. I will continue to act like the fool who is simply too tired, too defeated, to fight her narrative. The best way to stay silent and act like I did during the phone call is to practice Sarah's radical detachment. I need to stop viewing her as my wife and start viewing her as an Valor's adversary. Every conversation, every text must be treated as a transaction in a negotiation. When she speaks, I need to filter out the words and focus on the intent. Her "I miss you" means I need you to watch the cats. Her "I love you" means I need to ensure you don't fight me on the divorce terms. I need to respond only to the utility of her statement and ignore its emotional content entirely. To maintain the straight face, I must visualize the evidence before every interaction. I must recall the image of the condoms, the text where she called me impotent, and the absolute confirmation that she used our marital bed. That memory is not a flash of rage, it is a shield of ISIS. The rage must be channeled into the paperwork, the planning, and the final, clean exit. The moment I reveal my knowledge, the game changes, and she will start fighting dirty. I must wait until the career application is fully processed and secured, and then, and as only then, can I drop the facade and unleash the documented truth. The silence is the strongest weapon I have left, Nensity with her own powerful, creative energy.